Hello, everyone. So very pleased to have Drew Crisp from IBM with us today. So Drew's the executive partner at IBM for the communications sector and also a digital leader at IBM. So what we're going to do, this session is really focused on making it real. So it's really about those real world applications. How do you put it into practice, particularly in the context of customer engagement? So if you're in my panel session this morning, you'll have seen that a lot of the use cases for AI that we sort of got back from our recent enterprise survey were very customer centric. So I think it's good to talk about that aspect and what do you need to do in practice to get this up and running in your organizations. So Drew's going to start off with just a few slides, a few thoughts on his work in this area and what he sees as the foundations, the starting points for this, and then we'll have a conversation, talk through some of those issues, and very happy to take questions from the floor as well. So, Drew, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. Always, I love getting invites to these things because the topic is always so broad, and yet at the same time they're asked to be so specific. So I'm hoping over the next kind of just 10 minutes, you'll be pleased to hear I've only got slides with a few pictures on, nothing too taxing at this time of the day for you to read. But what I really wanted to do is just share a perspective, I suppose, and a point of view just to try and get you to think differently when it comes to AI. I think part of the challenge in the market is there's a lot of hype about AI, there's a lot of excitement, and quite rightly so. But therefore, everyone says, I must use AI, what's the problem? As opposed to, what's the problem and should I use AI? So that's really what I wanted to share with you. I'm hoping this clicker works. I was told that I have to be quite brutal with it. Oh, yes, there we go. Now, I think one of the questions that we should ask ourselves is, we've all got very excited, and again, rightly so, about customer experience. But I think we should think slightly differently when we consider our own organisations and us as big enterprises. Customer experience is, I want to change the touch point in a particular journey, and it's the outside-in perspective. If we think about customer engagement, I guess my view is, and my perspective is, that's the inside-out perspective, because it's really important that as an enterprise, you are thinking about how you apply, different processes. You're thinking about how you apply different technologies in order to do three things. And actually, this clicker really is quite hard, actually. I must go to the gym more. That businesses ultimately are always looking at three things. I have to drive efficiency in order to address the cost problem. I have to make sure I can grow in the market I'm in today. And I have to make sure that I'm going to be relevant in new markets, or indeed finding those new markets and actually being the kind of spearhead of those new markets. That is about engagement. Now, yes, of course, the quid pro quo is you're going to change customer experiences in some way, shape or form, but actually the starting point and the lens that you apply is somewhat different. And I think that it's important that as organisations we don't shy away from the fact that we need to look at efficiencies, right? None of us are charities, we've all got to make money. That's how the world goes round. So actually doing these things is essential. It shouldn't be at the detriment, of course, of customer experience, but ultimately that's why we're here. Now, I do believe that AI is fundamental, right? It's not like any AI shouldn't apply to any of those three things, but it's about how you apply it, and I would absolutely testify it's about what you apply it with, because on its own, it doesn't really solve anything. And in fact, if you really want to see what AI on its own does, there's a video on YouTube of two chatbots talking to each other. Honestly, it's like listening to two kind of drunk philosophers in a pub in Cambridge. And it's horrendous. So AI without people, without intervention, really doesn't add any value whatsoever. I think if we think about where to apply it, okay, I think going back to the 3 points I had on the other chart, okay, efficiency is, can I apply AI in order to understand a business process in a different way, take out some of the kind of manual overhead and actually start to get some intelligence from it? And that's where we get into the world of, do I need a chatbot, right? Or do I need, actually it's not chatbots anymore, it's conversation solutions. If we think about growth, how do I grow in an existing market? You have to be more and more relevant to your consumers. And the buzzword now is personification. So we've talked about the 360 view of a customer for years, right? Actually, that doesn't mean anything whatsoever if in that moment the customer's calling you because they've really had a bad day, they can't change their tariff, they end up bouncing around a call centre and then finally they're offered something and a product that they really don't want because they're cross. Whereas actually AI technologies can help understand the contextual moment, right? So actually that person really does sound quite pissed off. You know what, let's not try and sell them anything. That's where you should start to apply AI, and that's where it makes a difference in today's market. And then from a growth perspective, we can start to think about actually AI technologies can help us identify markets that we never knew existed. And that, I think, is the exciting point as well, because actually the majority of us now exist in commodity markets where the only debate is how do we cut costs? And the debate now should be how can I go and create a new market? And to bring that to life and give you an example, we did some work with a leading manufacturer of handbags, and we did some, and alongside, and for actually, a leading ice cream producer. And who would have imagined those two have got some kind of marriage? But actually, through the AI applied and understanding all sorts of information about people's buying habits and what they did afterwards, we could establish that it would be really useful to create pop-up stalls on certain streets at certain points next to certain shops. And actually, they would drive up the sales of their lovely ice creams. That 100 people in a room couldn't do that, right? Because it's unnatural for us to look at patterns in that way. AI technologies can look at patterns that way and start to really inform a market. So if we think a bit further about this, I think despite me not being able to use a clicker, did everyone have this problem? Is it just me? Oh, there we go. Despite the red trousers and the appearance of a digital person, I'm a consultant at heart, and so I felt the obligation to put a 4-box model up. But what I'm really saying here, and I'm not going to go into any detail about this, is it's a great model by BCG. Every organisation cannot survive with one strategy anymore, because if you think about those 3 lenses I put, of actually I want to drive efficiency, growth and new markets, AI can play a certain part in all of those in very different ways, and it's important to really think about what am I trying to do as an organisation and where do I want to be as a business. So if I'm in a highly predictable environment, okay, and it's an incredibly malleable type of industry, then I should be thinking about shaping new services, because actually I've got, it's in my gift to be able to do that, versus actually if I'm existing in a new market and it's highly predictable, I'm basically doing some better stuff today than I did yesterday, right? And I might be doing something around omni-channel or next best actions, which arguably everyone does today. We can do it slightly quicker and slightly better with AI. So I think it's just a useful context to frame how you apply AI and how it might help. And then my final point would be that really the use of AI fundamentally depends on 2 things. One is people, right? We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that people matter. Every single employee really, really is essential to the application of AI, because ultimately we're the ones that train it, we're the ones that are going to look at the recommendations, we're the ones that are going to try and understand what it's telling us, and we're going to make some decisions on it. We're not in the iRobot world where it truly is going to take over our world. I think the second point is everyone talks about data, and I think you've probably had a number of presentations today, and I know that the Chief Data Officer from Telefonica was on stage talking about what they're doing around data, and actually what they're doing is creating a platform, and the platform is going to inform them and give them the capabilities to inform all sorts of decisions. I'm sure there's not a single organisation in this world that hasn't got a data lake the size of Massachusetts, right? But the importance isn't that data lake. The importance is how do you go from knowledge through to wisdom? Because if you can start to drive wisdom out of all of that information, and I don't just mean information in your CRM systems which sit behind 4 firewalls because we're worried about GDPR, I also mean all of the information and data that's kind of out in the social world that we can look at, then you'll start to take some action. And if we can start to take action, and you can start to get some wisdom from that data, you'll start to make new markets, you'll start to find areas to grow. I thought this was an interesting quote, just to kind of conclude, really. I think this is true partially. I think it's going to happen by stealth when we as a bunch of organisations get it right. And I think by getting it right, it means it's almost seamless to the consumer. You know, whether they're talking to an AI-based conversation bot, or you know, you're using it to drive a bunch of market decisions, ultimately you're still going to become a trusted brand. You're going to become an even more trusted brand because you're delivering real value to your customers and your consumers. So I partly agree with that, but I think if you get it right, you'll do it without really realising it. And so I think we use the word AI, and I think in an enterprise context, I'm not sure we should, because there's nothing artificial in this. It's real, right? It's out there. We can use it now. People are using it now, and we can do even more with it. It's also not here to replace us. It's here to help us. It's here to make us better at our jobs. It's here to give us different perspectives. So I don't think it's AI. I think it's IA, and I think the IA is an intelligent assistant, and I think we should think about it in those terms. And if we do, I truly believe that enterprises will transform themselves. So I thank you very much. I think we're going to have a chat and some questions.
Thank you, Drew. Come and join me. I'll pour you a glass of water for your sterling efforts. So I guess thinking particularly about the comms sector, how do those, what's the trigger for these conversations, these projects in a comms business?
I think, as I said at the beginning, the trigger's sometimes the wrong one. We
Right.
ought to be using this new technology, didn't we? So go get it. I think actually it's not strictly true for everyone, and it's probably a broad brush statement. But I do think the trigger, in the most part, is one of those three lenses that I put up earlier. The majority of them, I would say the trigger is the top one. We should be able to drive efficiency into our business if we use AI properly.
Yeah.
That's the main trigger. I guess my challenge to everybody, and all of us, me included, is we shouldn't just be thinking about that. We should be saying, how can I use AI to grow?
Yeah. And who's involved in those conversations? Who are the key stakeholders driving this?
I think it's very variable. Actually, when it comes to having a conversation about AI, it always initiates from the land of IT, I would say. And I again challenge that and say, you know, I don't think it should do. I think that if it's about organisational efficiency, it needs to be from within, you know, your supply chain function or your finance function or your procurement function, because actually those functions can get real tangible business benefits. I think if it's about growth and markets, it should be your marketing people. But naturally, those functions don't necessarily think about, I could apply some, clever technology here to solve this big business problem.
So is that why there's a bit of a disconnect? So if IT is driving the conversation, does it become more, here's a technology looking for a problem?
I think it is a bit of that. I also think it's we ought to be able to do this and use it, so what can we use it on? I think there's also a degree of skepticism, I suppose, if you like, about, and again, because we talk about AI, it's artificial intelligence, we've brainwashed ourselves into thinking that is the next robot that's going to take over our jobs, and it's absolute, I just don't believe a word of it. Actually, it should be this. And I think because it's not seen that way, that's why it doesn't necessarily, it's not a natural part of vocabulary in those business functions.
Yeah. So when you get to talk to the business, what's the sort of level of understanding? Are they realistic about what they might achieve? Do they understand the principles?
I think they probably do understand the principles. I think the challenge that most organisations face is where to start.
Yeah.
And actually, with these sort of things, actually, you need to start somewhere small, somewhere that is really going to make a difference to that business outcome. And then actually, once you've done that, it's kind of easy to build on. So, if 60% of calls into a call centre are because somebody's going to query a bill, and you want to deflect those calls, well then let's take that little problem and work out how we can use some of this technology to actually fix it, and then what's the knock-on impact to people in the call centre, to the experience when they go online on their mobile device and all the and actually that's how to really start with this. And I think because it's a big topic, everyone assumes it's going to be a massive program of work, and it all gets a bit scary.
So what about the applications? I know we were talking earlier a bit about there's been a lot of focus on digital assistants.
Yeah.
But presumably it's wider than that, the opportunity.
Yeah, I think it is much wider than that, and that's why I also go back to the kind of first slide, which is what engagement do you want with your consumers, and therefore where do you apply it? So yes, you can get a whole series of AI engines that are out there and algorithms that are going to chew through some data and actually start to give you some different insights. But ultimately, what you wrap around that, depends upon what problem you're trying to solve. So you might need to link it to, some process automation software, because actually, if your AI engine spits out a recommendation and you can automatically process that transaction, fantastic, that saves you money. Yeah. In the same way, you might want to apply it to reading emails, right? So to do how many emails, queries, customer inquiries do organizations like yourselves get, your ability to be able to actually understand that text and turn that into, an immediate response without somebody having to sit and go through 24,000 records a day, fantastic. So, there's a whole bunch of different things you want to apply to.
And how do companies think about measuring success? Can you measure ROI on these types of projects?
The short answer is yes, and again we I think we lose sight of the fact, and actually I put that on the data slide, which was there's got to be value from this, and how do we measure it? If you look at standard things, your NPS will go up if you've improved the experience by which a customer can buy a new product, make an inquiry, change their tariff, pay a bill, and if some of that is automated and happens really quickly, it's bound to go up. So you can do it on that way. I know for a fact in certain sporting organisations I'm working with, it's about how do we imply a level of intelligence about what somebody is buying, where they're buying it from, and therefore can we increase merchandise sales? Well, yeah, absolutely. Can you measure it? Definitely. So you can, but you can only measure it if you understand the business problem that you're going after.
Yeah, that's a good point. So sort of shifting gears a little bit, once you get into a project, what are the sort of common roadblocks? What are the sort of precursors that you think about that people need to get in place to really make progress?
Good question. There's always reasons not to do these sort of projects because they're a bit scary, right?
Yep.
And it's new territory. So I think one of the blockers is we don't know what it's going to mean. We don't know its impact, and therefore I'm not really sure we should do it because it's a bit. So I think one, and that sometimes happens when people want to tackle a big problem. So I think part of the roadblock is we're trying to solve a massive problem, which something is to a certain extent unknown, and it's driven from a technology perspective, not from a what does it mean to my business process, my organisation model, and who's now going to be doing what. So I think that's definitely a blocker. I also think that there's a concern that if you commit to a certain technology around AI, you'll never get away from that technology, and actually you're wedded to it, and is that the right answer in terms of longevity, and am I going to have any regret spend? And I think again that lens needs to be changed, which is there's multiple different solutions out there, and actually AI is an engine that can sit behind all manner of things. So I think that's a blocker, and that perspective needs to change.
What about the data aspects of it? So do you see that sort of getting the data foundations right, does it need sort of good data governance, data management in place?
As I said there, data is absolutely essential actually, because unless there's not much point in having an AI engine that can kind of chew 10,000 records a second if there's no records. But it's about making sure that the data that you've got is relevant and is reasonably robust. I also think the other blocker is we assume that it has to be based on data inside the organisation. I know everything about my customers because I've got a CRM platform, and that's definitely the answer. The reality is now it's out of date, within a minute because somebody's done something in a social channel. So the other thing from a data perspective is, yes, you need to have data governance. Yes, you need to know where it is, but it's also about what data do you want to be able to surface and why. And that doesn't necessarily mean you just look at your own organisation. Yeah.
And what are people's sort of expectations with these projects? Are people starting with fairly small, discrete projects, or are they, the sort of big hairy goal type things.
I actually think it's changing. About a year ago, everyone was doing POCs and little proofs of concept, and we've applied this little chatbot, and isn't it wonderful? And yes, you're right, it is. But the challenge now is about scale. And I think one of the challenges that a lot of organisations are struggling with is, I can do a small proof of concept on, a contained set of data, probably even a contained set of customers and a target market, and I can show good value. How do I actually scale it up to hit, 10 million customers and make sure it can work for 4,000 agents? So I think that is definitely a shift in the nature of projects. I don't think that necessarily means that you immediately go big bang and say, I'm going to land this thing and it's going to solve all of that problem. I do still think you need to start small, but you do need to have a plan of where you want to take it, and the scalability has to address all of the things in terms of your typical IT landscape, but it also has to address the operating model point.
Yeah, okay, good. I'll come to the audience for questions in a moment, but once you've put that sort of first project in place, are people actually sort of finding unexpected results or unexpected consequences of their projects?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some organisations that have found that maybe the technology of choice that sits in front of an AI engine wasn't the right one, and actually they needed to swap it out to give a better engagement for customers on certain things. That's definitely an unintended or a consequence that they hadn't necessarily thought of. I think also, I think people are always amazed at the impact it has. So, if an organisation, which we know about, can deflect 40% of its calls into the call centre in a matter of months, 3 or 4 months, and actually you start to deflect that into conversation, the impact to the business is enormous, but so is the impact to customers. Yeah. And I think that, that's the level of impact that organisations are seeing, and I think that is still a surprise to most people.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that was even possible.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Any questions from the audience for Drew?
Go easy.
Yeah. Go easy on him. We've got a mic, please. Thank you. Gentleman here.
Hi there.
Hi.
My name's David Pastron. I'm former CIO in the commercial sector, but I'm working with not-for-profits nowadays.
Okay.
And heard lots of excellent stuff today. I haven't heard any examples around the charity or the not-for-profit sector. So have you come across any examples of this sort of technology being used in that way?
That's a very good question. Charities or not-for-profits? Off the top of my head, if I'm brutally honest, the short answer to that is no. I was at an event on innovation last Tuesday with somebody from Age UK, and they are trying to deploy AI to do customer inquiry and things like that. And actually, they're doing it whilst it's kind of obviously got a capital spend. They're doing it because ultimately it should help them save a bunch of operational spend. So I do know for a fact that someone in Age UK is trying to deploy it. I think the challenge is, yet again, we must use AI and I must get this AI engine in, and they haven't actually worked out what that wrapper should be in terms of the customer touch point. But yes, so Age UK are. I don't know whether I should be telling you that actually, but anyway. Too late now. Apologies to anyone from Age UK.
Other questions? Okay. Oh, one at the back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Guy Peach. I'm from Ovum. You said that the data, you had to have the data in place in order to be able to apply AI. Is there a kind of minimum data threshold upon which you can start to apply AI and make it valuable and useful?
When you say threshold, do you mean volume or do you mean variance or
volume? I'm mostly thinking of.
I mean, in bits and bytes terms, I don't know from a computation algorithm perspective, but I think unless you have got significant volumes of data that go, that have a backwards-looking lens of 6 or 12 months across multiple demographics, depending on what market you're in, you're not going to get the outcomes that you're really looking for. So, and I know for a fact, for a water company, we did some recent pilots about how can we use AI in order to predict, failures in assets, you have to have kind of 6 months minimum historic data and trends across different facets to be able to make it successful. It's probably a loose answer to that question. I don't.
No, I think that's a good one.
But I would also say though that example is data that sits within an organisation that they've already got. If you're looking at, I want to look at customer trends and customer analysis and what customers may or may not be doing. Well, actually, you've got all that data in the world because it's kind of called social media. So actually, you do want to marry that with trends in your own data, but ultimately, there's gigabytes of it out there.
So if you had one recommendation, Drew, what's the most important sort of first step that you'd recommend to a business in the comms sector to get moving with AI?
Can I only have one, or can I have two?
You can have two. Yes,
all right.
You can have two.
So I always ask for more. So the first one is to that 4-box model, right? It's a clever way of saying, what am I applying AI to do? Am I doing it because I want efficiency, or am I doing it because I want to find a new market?
Yep.
That's the first thing. And I think then the second thing is be really clear about the tangible, real business problem that you want to solve. The question shouldn't be, I'm going to apply AI to create 40% efficiency across my business processes in a customer operation. Crack on, but that'll never work. If you say, actually, 80% of my calls are about bill inquiries, they're a standard bunch of questions, and therefore let's apply AI and come up with a small POC to prove it, absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
That's what I do.
Great advice. Look, thank you very much. Are you going to be around during the coffee break,
Yes,
Drew?
yes, absolutely.
So please do come and grab Drew if you'd like to learn more. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.